This is JP Warren again, and we're recording a special several blocks of information regarding human trafficking and sex trafficking. And I'm sitting here right now. We're recording this at the Spriggan Technology Center.
Wow!
And I got it right for the first time. I don't know if y'all have been watching any of these blocks that we've been filming about. We're kind of taking chunks of the human trafficking, the sex trafficking topics, and kind of I don't know that much about it. I'm not comfortable talking about it. So that's kind of why we're here today, to kind of bring it up to light on a level that people that are new learning about this subject and people that kind of want to learn about the subject and get involved a little bit. And that's kind of the purpose of this. So before we continue with this section of the conversation, I'd like to introduce who I'm sitting with today.
Who are you sitting with?
Me. I'm sitting with these two. These two wonderful people.
He can't remember my name. I'm
okay. Yeah.
I'm David Reed with NOV and the founder of Red M.
And I'm Jess Brassington, the host of Naked Talk with Jess podcast, and I'm with Red M as well.
So we've been talking about a lot of interesting subjects right now. Number one, how to identify sexual trafficking. We talked about what's the things to look out for, the parent-child relationship, the father-daughter relationship, actually, that you touched on, which I love. We talked about porn, prostitution, and strippers in one of them, which is something that we talked about. Now I want to discuss this because I'm a little bit uncomfortable talking about it.
Good.
I want to discuss, it is good because the more I talk about it, the more comfortable I get.
There you go.
And I mean, it's one of those muscles that you have to flex.
That's
so
right.
I want to discuss, number one, three parts to this. Number one, how to talk about it, okay? What to talk about. I mean, I noticed that you're using words such as, you're not using victim. You're not using sex trafficking victim this, victim that, because they're not victims.
Well, they were victimized.
But
words become important mostly for them.
But
right?
what I'm saying is you've been throughout these blocks have been using the term of survivors. Yeah. And so before we even told me why you're using that term, and I want you to discuss that again, I would continue to say victims. Yeah. But so let's talk about, first off, number one, how to talk about it, what to talk about, what to avoid talking about it, and also just how to keep the conversation on a light level for those people out there like myself who aren't familiar with this, who aren't embedded in it or found Red M, who aren't dealing with these charities and these survivors. So how do you keep the conversation light and social? So let's start in the beginning. How do you talk about this?
I would say for me, so since I began helping with Red M, people that I know will say, well, what is Red M? Or I saw a post of you with Red M. And so we start the conversation there. And like you said, I don't want to overwhelm them with all these scary statistics and things and so they don't want their children to leave the house now or get on their phones. So I really just say, this is something that, just like we discussed previously, that does happen in the US. There's many layers to sex trafficking. There's a lot of things we think that, a lot of ways that it happens that we don't think about. Like we said before, we think of sometimes it's in a different country or it's someone kidnapping a child, and that's not always how it happens. So I really just give a general awareness of it, and then I give them a place to go and look for more information and start saying things that we said in the previous episodes of the first step is just be more aware of it, and then what you feel comfortable with, start finding that information. But we have to make sure that we're not overwhelmed with it. So that's usually how I start the conversation, that it is something that does affect people here in the U.S., but I want them to be prepared but not scared about it.
Oftentimes, when with my friends or when you pass by certain Katie Mills Mall, people are always like, oh, that's a huge sex trafficking hub right there. Oh, I heard that too. And that's how it stops. And that's when the conversation stops. Oh, yeah. It's known. So
about Woodlands Mall too.
Yeah. So what I'm saying is, so usually the conversation does start, and it's usually a fact like, oh, that place is a huge sex trafficking hub right there, and it stops. So what advice would you have, David, about continuing that conversation, kind of pulling a little bit more out and to shed awareness?
That's people trying to say be careful there, or don't let your kids go there on their own, or they're trying to do the right thing. I think the socializing of it, so there are great places you can go and learn. There's an incredible report done by the governor's office with University of Texas, very detailed, but really shocking numbers on Texas. It's good to know. Regurgitating those numbers to people, not good.
Right.
Not helpful. It's weird because everyone does that. They learn a piece and then they regurgitate it. and sometimes forget, which I do a lot. I'll forget an actual number or get it wrong, and then that number changes and it gets weird. What you want to do is learn to give people a bit, because it is, you forget. The more you get around it, the more you're used to it, the less shocked you are. There are moments for people where something happens and it's a overwhelming emotion.
Right.
For me, I watched a show it was the first time I realized how it was affecting American teens, and my daughter was the age of the person on the screen. A very emotional moment for me. We're like, okay, I can't cope with this information. And that's a really human thing. But what we don't do is, when we're socially talking about it, we're not gauging the person. They're engaged and they're shocked, and we're thinking, oh, I'm being really interesting right now. But you're actually doing more damage to continue to shock them. Because, so for example, in any conversation, Jess did it really well there, where you talk a little bit about it, ask people to do a bit of research. It's getting people more and more into the subject, but not giving them everything. So sometimes we want to show them how much we know on a subject. And often, as the numbers get thrown around, we all think we're experts. It isn't good for the reality of what people go through and the reality of what it is, as well as the reality of what people need to know. They need to know a little bit. They need to learn a bit. They need to be given some information. But trying to gather everything and tell everybody everything, I've done it many times, and it's a dead end street.
Yeah.
Like, you're talking to people, you're talking about, and then you suddenly feel the heaviness of what you've just done.
It's a lot.
It's too much.
It really
is
too
taking
much.
Everyone out. Like, they don't know where to go. They're feeling a heaviness they can't control. It's like, the reality is more slavery in the U.S. than in its history ever. Big deal, right?
Yeah, that is.
And you can throw numbers around, and you're living in that. Well, how do you help someone up from that? How do you give them tools to start navigating through life? And so the better thing is and this is what Red M does for us a lot, is you're doing something. So I mean, it's more about we're actively going towards something. We don't talk all the time about what's going on in trafficking.
I'm talking about when you're sitting there with your friends and all that, and a comment like that does come up. Like, oh,
Yeah.
You can tell people, wow, there's so much more to trafficking and where it is and what it is. It's not just there; it's everywhere. But learning how to protect from it, knowing, giving them a bit of information, as opposed to just saying this is the place. Because that's why I was surprised that someone would say a mall, is a hub. It's like, well, there could have been some people taken from a mall for sure, but that can happen in any grocery store or anything. But knowing that Katie and the Woodlands have had, sex trafficking rings ran out of houses in normal neighborhoods, that happened. What? That happened? Yeah. Cinco Ranch. What? Yeah, that happened. And a lot of people were taken down, but that's a start of a journey for someone. And so not then giving them all the other information. It's just like, yeah, you should. So that's what we do with Red M. We kind of get people. It's a great way to socialize people, because you're shocked about it. I want to do something. Well, that's what we do. We give you something to do, and we talk about doing something. So it's a lot more about the thing you're doing, but it's also slowly socializing you with the subject.
I think it'd be a good idea too. This might be a bad idea. I'm just, again, I don't know.
It's an idea.
I don't know. It's an idea. Well, thank you. I appreciate that, David. It might be not a bad idea. I'm like, oh yeah, like, what else do you know about, human trafficking? Asking, like, what do you know about it? And then you can be like, and you can mirror what they know.
That's right.
At the whatever level they're coming at.
Yeah, it is that terrible thing we do in conversations of one-upping each other. And that's what makes the numbers get more fantastic.
Yeah.
And I know when I've talked with the mayor's office in Houston, they're like, please stop using the numbers. And I tell them, I'll use numbers I know that are true. I won't stop using those numbers, but I will stop the generic, because people start giving stats that, we talk about how 75% of sex trafficking in Houston are American, or people born in the States. 75, some people say 85. Is it 60? There's no one filling out a form for this stuff, right? They're like, are you trafficked? Yes. Are you American? Yes. No one's doing that.
Right.
So there's forms that they're assessing things, and so you have to let people. Generally, it seems like we feel like it looks like, but then everyone just throws out these numbers. If you look at what's the global number, It's 25, what is it, 25 billion? Is that right? I can't remember the global number. 25 million must be. 25 million. See what I mean about numbers. But there's another 45. There's a 40. Like I've seen different numbers.
There's just it's just a lot of numbers.
And they're trying to. These are governments and organizations trying to calculate. The thing to remember is you have to get to much more manageable numbers. Like how many people do I know who I can help? What can I do for a person? People ask me. It's another podcast. How many women do you think? Someone did a post on it with me today. This will be David Reed. How many people he's made a difference in their life? And I'm like, I just need one.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's a good number. If I can make a difference for one, I'm doing my part. I don't need to know the big numbers because it can be shocking.
I'll tell you one thing. I mean, again, I'm gonna bring back the gala. I mean, you heard all the numbers. You heard it's the $1 billion industry. It's I mean, you hear about
it's bigger than all these.
Yeah, you hear all this stuff, and I mean, you're hearing all this stuff, and it's in disbelief. I'm shaking my head like, oh wow. No. But the thing that moved me is when they told that story about that one girl. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And just you hear that one story, and that kind of hits you close to home.
I mean, I having got to know survivors, I just love knowing them, and seeing it. And the one or two theory is much better than the big numbers.
So what kind of stuff? I mean, so we're talking about this, and what things should I guess people avoid? When they're discussing human trafficking. I mean, obviously the term victim, they're not victims, they're survivors.
Survivors.
So what are some stuff that people could probably avoid? Obviously laying off the stats and the numbers and the digits, because that's
not as helpful. Yeah, it is big. Better to answer a number with, yes, it is big.
Yes.
It is massive.
It's a big problem. That's what I say.
Because we don't have exacts. And I do say that, well, there isn't a Gallup poll that goes out,
yeah.
So I think that I'm still learning, because knowing a survivor or survivors really does help, because you're saying things wrong all the time that make them feel certain ways. I know when I've been around survivors, it's always been about they're just people, they're just people. Could have been me, and that's the understanding of how people get caught in cults. It's the same thing. They didn't go into this for these things to happen. They didn't plan it. They were.
I mean, you hear about these, obviously the horror of a situation like this, and just the year after year after year, and the continuous rape after every they turn every trick. That you hear all these horrible things.
Yeah.
And you're listening to it, and I guess what I'm saying is like, so I'd be so cautious, and you don't want to say anything because you don't want to say anything wrong.
Right. And I'll say that I had a survivor who's also a really good friend of mine on my podcast, Rich Love, and she came on basically not just as a survivor and talk about that, but just to be on the show. And you hear the shocking thing. So she did share a little bit. She was trafficked as a teen. She did share that she thought she wanted to be trafficked, like we've shared before. She had two parents, a loving home.
She thought she chose it.
Yeah. And as we're talking, it just naturally was woven into the conversation later, as we talked about today, and teens and just strippers, Cardi B and different things. And she said, well, I was in the lifestyle, a stripper. I was, gang raped, and it's like so shocking. But because we're friends, I'm so glad that I didn't not have that relationship with her, because I was afraid to say the wrong thing, because as we've gotten to know each other and build trust, I do look at her as a person.
Yeah.
Yes, she's been through this horrific thing, and she is a survivor. But if I can just speak to that, that as I've gotten to know more survivors, when you build that trust, they're not going to take it as you're doing something. Now, obviously, I personally wouldn't just say, well, tell me about it, or share an experience.
Right.
But really, it's just building that trust and saying, hey, I just, I care about you, and you will get to where you see that survivor as a person.
Another word when we get used to saying is someone was a prostitute. That, first of all, that is not who they are. But they were prostituted is the right language. It
happened to them.
Mm-hmm. Someone pushed them and made them do it.
Yeah. So these are the stuff that I'm curious about hearing, because it's a small change.
It's a small detail, but it matters.
It's a small detail that doesn't just change the tone of the conversation, but it also changes what you're thinking when you're having those conversations.
Yes.
Exactly. It is. We talked about it in a previous episode on with knowing that this is child rape. This isn't. I can't even
Kitty
think of
porn.
kitty porn.
Is child rape.
No such thing. There are words that are trying to socialize pedophilia, and that's why we need to work to do the opposite, to understand that is not okay. That there is no case where that's somehow someone's choice or preference. It's not good. Should not be happening.
So how do you keep the conversation? I'm thinking, if it's my wife and I are at a friend's home, we're having a play day with our children and all that stuff. I mean, how do you keep the conversation on a light level to inform without going down into such a heavy conversation during a play date? So I'm saying on pretty much everyday circumstances, how do you kind of bring it up with your friends and your community on the light level that people would be comfortable discussing?
I think you had the right answer, which is to ask questions of people, and then you can add a little bit to that, because I think that's the process. It's more of a snowball of learning, that rolling down a hill where it just gets larger and larger as your knowledge grows. So if you see someone and you think we're going to talk about it, let them lead, and then you add, without getting heavy on how much you know or what you know.
Yeah.
That's a self-restraint thing that is hard for people, but you need to learn it. Especially if you're more of an extrovert, where you tend to just talk things through and get excited about subjects. Oh, you're on a subject. This isn't a hobby we're talking about. This is an extremely careful and important process for people to go through of learning. And so just hearing what they've got and adding to that something and saying, if I've seen something, encourage them, steer them away from taken. Steering people out of the Pretty Woman view of prostitution is critical. It's like, you remember Pretty Woman? Oh yeah, what a great. I said that couldn't be more set up to make sure the current world of human trafficking could exist. That we believe someone's like, no, I think I'll choose it. Oh, it's a rich man. That's my dream. I'm going to get rich.
Yeah.
It's a real relationship. It's all good. That is not the reality at all. There's a, I mean, you could work and find a case, of something, but this idea that prostitution, it's always been around, it's the oldest profession. Yet the biggest state number for human trafficking is Nevada. Wonder why that is. Wonder why it's Nevada, and you're like, because of the laws.
Yeah.
It's the same as people like red light district. I went there. It's so cool. Kind of looks a bit like a zoo. Kind of does. I wonder what's behind that. So I have a friend who has a business helping women get out from the trafficking there. But there are people who legitimately, I'm just a free sexual being and I'm selling my body. And there are a few of those, but the percentages are very small compared to, because around sexually oriented businesses always drugs, guns, and there are things that come around it that then so maybe not fully understood is the people who are involved, the higher levels of trafficking, are the same people who do gun running and drug running. So they're, it's the same business people. It's just the most fruitful business they have, because human beings keep paying. Drugs are a one-time sale. Guns are a one-time sale.
Right.
Human beings just keep giving them money. And so it's that's why they've been pushing it. It's a great product for them. But then they think about human beings as products. It's kind of wild, but.
And I think just having a few, like we said in previous episodes, a few resources that maybe it's a number or Polaris project that we mentioned before, just having a few of those there. So when the person you're talking to, if they want to know more, you're giving them those resources, because like we said, it's not a flippant type of fun thing to talk about. So not everyone's ready to take on all the pieces. So just like you said, I think it's perfect. Bring it up, or you never know nowadays if the Katie Mills comment was made, or, my kids are getting a phone now, or, have you heard of Roblox? Whatever it is, when it comes up, have just a few resources to share, so you're not overwhelming somebody.
Right.
And then you're putting it back in the ball's back in their court.
And sometimes you're punishing people who shouldn't be punished. So Katie Mills, people work there. Yeah. Right. That's their living.
Yeah, and some people go there just to get their clothes. Yeah,
that's why I was surprised to hear it. It's the first time I'd heard it, and I was just like, it's the same as for years. I was like these massage parlors, which are predominantly Asian, until I met someone from the Asian community who said, "You're killing our business. because people assume my aunts and my sister and my
Yes,
mother
that's
are trafficked, and they're not. They're just very good at this.
Yeah.
And that's how they made. I was like, oh, I hadn't even considered the damage I'm doing by telling everyone. So that distinction of watching for the signs of trafficking rather than saying, it's massage parlors. It's one of the mechanisms.
And that kind of goes back to what we were talking about in a previous blog. Don't judge.
Yeah.
Just have the conversation. No judgment.
I think
that's what it's there for.
I think that's right. It's conversationally getting somewhere, and it's just that there comes a point where you're tipping over the edge. It's too much, and that's when you just pull back, let it rest. Let people consume their food and chew it. You give them something to eat, they're going to chew it. You don't just keep ramming food in their mouth.
It's kind of like what I've always said. It's kind of like spicy food, right?
Mm-hmm.
Actually, I took that from you when we
You
were
did.
recording. You want to take it? You want to take it?
No, it's like you always say.
The dragon.
It's nice to have
a
a little bit of spice in your food, but you don't just want to eat jalapenos, which some people do, but most don't.
Yeah.
It's like Indian food. People who are Indian, they're used to eating it. They've got used to it. But when they feed you their hottest food, they're like, it's a little bit hot, and you're like, I can't. And it's just because you're familiar with it, and that doesn't mean other people will be. So you've got to give them mild bits, and get them used to it. And but I think knowing that it's a journey for everybody, and every time I've been on any show talking about this, I feel wildly inadequate to explain it. But it's just I'm further down the road.
Yeah.
But I am not a survivor of sex trafficking.
Yeah.
And when you get around them, and every time you're like, oh gosh, I didn't think about that.
Mm-hmm.
There's always new things, and so it is nice if you can ever hear someone who's a survivor. However, one of the worst things organizations do is see them as the way. I'm going to have them share, so you end up re-exploiting.
When they start promoting them as like, look at this success story.
Yeah, and so the those that I know, there's one I know who chooses to take this path. This is what they're going to be about, but many don't want you ever knowing.
Yeah.
So in earlier episodes, I told stories that I'm like, I got to watch. I don't reveal who someone is, or because it's really, really important that they get to live a life, as a human being, and not. So they generally don't tell anyone if they can, and once they've been through a good healing process, you can't really tell anyway,
That's awesome. That's amazing to hear.
It is amazing.
It really is. I mean, especially after you live in such a nightmare and a unchosen, forced nightmare. That's great to hear.
And I can speak as a parent. When you said the mall comment, I live in Montgomery, but they said that about the Woodlands Mall. And then, as a mom, especially of teens driving, you're already kind of scared as it is. And, we have Life 360, we have these different things. But in my head, I'm like, okay, as a good mom, should I just say, don't go to the mall then? Okay, that's it. My kids are 15 and 17. And so I think, like what David said, it's important to take that information and don't keep repeating it necessarily, but to the fact that we need to be careful everywhere.
Yeah.
It's kind of an eye opener, but it's not so much as that mall or this mall. It's everywhere, and we need to really use caution wherever we are. And so I do let my children go there, but I definitely said, don't feel. I don't remember who said this. Maybe it was at one of our events, but that a lot of times when children are more comfortable in a setting that they think is safe, they use that to their advantage, because, those children aren't looking around the corner for the big scary guy that's going to take them. So I just told my children, hey, listen, just reminding them we need to be careful regardless of where we are. And, don't stranger danger, you wouldn't tell a teen that, but same thing. If someone's coming up to you and saying, hey, sometimes they give away free phones or say, do you want to be a model or something? That's something you need to look out for. But I think just instead of getting scared and saying, okay, my kids can't go to this place, just be aware.
And it's also wouldn't be a bad idea or an exercise with your children to say, hey, look, I've told you about this. I've told you about XYZ to watch out for. Let me ask you a question. What are you going to look out for? That way it kind of it might engage them a little bit.
Yeah, or putting it back into their hands of what would you do if someone, said this or something to you? Well, I guess I could do this, or I guess I could find someone who works there, or call you right away. Just giving them, seeing where they're at, and then letting them think through the process, because that's what's going to happen in that situation. If you're not there, they're going to have to think through the steps and take action.
And then usually that active thinking is probably a lot more beneficial than saying, okay, don't look out for this, look out for this. You know,
yeah, they kind of with kids, it's like, okay,
just drop me off. I want to be there. Yeah. So I would say, honestly, I'm going to throw a challenge out there, a call to action. I think a good challenge or a call to action would be, if you hear this, try to engage at least 1 or 2 conversations with it. Get comfortable with it, bringing it up or discussing it. Whether it's with a spouse, with a friend, or a buddy, that's a call to action. Just try to do it maybe once or twice for the next couple of days, and to get comfortable with it. So you can start being more comfortable bringing it up, or if someone brings it up with you, you can actually engage with them as well. Yeah. What would be another call for action that y'all think would be good for this?
Well, I do think doing some of your research. We talked about that earlier. But I think you're right. I think practicing talking to people about it, bringing it up, finding out a bit more. We'll probably talk later about getting engaged with Red M, but I do think finding a way to do something, because it tends to be my circle, what I do, who I'm around, who I'm talking to about it. You're going to find some people don't want to talk about it. That's okay.
And we're going to obviously bring up Red M and the organization and how to get involved in, obviously on the next block, I believe. But I mean, even that could be an easy an avenue. Look, we don't got to get into it. We don't got to be heavy, but if you want to go check out their Instagram account, I mean, because that's it's light stuff. It's very surface stuff. So that can kind of allow people to kind of dip their toe in the water and kind of guide a little bit.
Just like you would do, especially, given today's day and age, let's be honest, there's so many really, heavy subjects that we have to talk about or think about. And what would you naturally do? If you supported something or wanted more information, you would do just that. You would say, hey, go check out their Instagram, or hey, we do it naturally when we share stuff with people, but it's just because this is an uncomfortable subject. We're like, ooh, how do we do it? Just do it how you would naturally share an Instagrammer that has great recipes or has stuff on health. Kind of get them. Now you're not making it so like, hey, go and do this. It's like, hey, check them out.
Yeah, check it out. You got time.
Yeah,
it's fun.
And that'll lead to more stuff. So I like that.
I like that engaging conversation. So well, thank you. I look forward to the next block.
Thank you.
Thank you.